Hello there everyone, welcome to Shadowman Stories. I am your storyteller and I'm here to guide you tonight. I know many of you use these videos to drift off to sleep, so before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. I'm always curious, where are you watching from and what time is it in your part of the world? Now, find your cozy spot and relax. My name is Catherine Wolfram, but everyone calls me Kit. I've been a park ranger for 14 years now, and I've seen things that would make most people quit their jobs. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened in the winter of 1977. I work in the Superior National Forest in Minnesota. It's beautiful country, but in winter it becomes something else entirely. The cold doesn't just bite, it tears at you like a wild animal. That winter was the worst on record. The temperature hit 40 below zero and stayed there for weeks. I grew up in Germany after the war, when food was hard to find. My family went hungry a lot. Maybe that's why I became so good at winter survival. I know what real hunger feels like, and I know how to fight it, or at least I thought I did. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. Doug Henriksen, my partner, was drinking coffee when the radio crackled to life. A group of 12 ice fishermen had missed their check-in. They'd been out at Lake Disappointment for 3 days with no contact. Probably just radio trouble, Doug said, but his eyes looked worried. I shook my head. Not in this cold. Equipment fails fast out there. We loaded up our snowmobiles with emergency supplies, medical kit, extra blankets, food, rope, everything we might need for a rescue. The wind was howling like something alive, and fresh snow fell so thick we could barely see 10 feet ahead. The ride to Lake Disappointment took 2 hours through trails that kept disappearing under new snow. My face felt frozen solid inside my helmet. Doug's snowmobile kept stalling, and we had to stop 3 times to get it running again. When we finally reached the fishing camp, something felt wrong right away. The silence was too complete. No voices, no sounds of generators running, no smoke from the warming huts, just the endless moan of wind through the trees. The camp looked abandoned, but not the way you'd expect. Tents were still up, equipment was scattered around, but there were no people. Their trucks sat in a neat row, but when Doug tried to start one, nothing happened. The engine was dead cold. "Look at this," Doug called out. I walked over to where he was kneeling by one of the trucks. The fuel line had been chewed through, not cut, chewed, like an animal had been gnawing on it. "What kind of animal eats rubber?" I asked. Doug didn't answer. He was staring at something else. Food supplies were stacked near the main tent, unopened. Canned goods, dried meat, bread, enough to feed 12 men for a week. None of it touched. That's when I noticed the bite marks. They were on the metal cans, deep gouges where teeth had scraped against aluminum. Someone had tried to eat the cans themselves, metal and all. The marks were too big to be from any animal I knew. "Doug," I said quietly, "try the radio." He clicked on his handheld radio and spoke our call numbers. Instead of the usual static, we heard something else. A sound, like grinding, like teeth scraping together, coming through the speaker. We looked at each other. Neither of us said what we were both thinking, that we needed to get out of there fast. But then we found the ice fishing holes. There were dozens of them, cut in a perfect circle on the frozen lake. The ice around each hole was stained dark red, and floating in the black water were bones. Human bones, picked completely clean. I felt sick. In all my years as a ranger, I'd never seen anything like this. "We need to call for backup," Doug said, his voice shaking. I nodded, but when I tried my radio, all I got was that same grinding sound. We were completely cut off. The sun was already setting, and the temperature was dropping fast. We had 2 choices: try to make it back in the dark, or stay and investigate until morning. As a ranger, I knew what I had to do. These 12 people were my responsibility. Whatever had happened to them, I needed to find out. But deep down, in a part of me that remembered being hungry as a child, I knew we were in terrible danger. Something was very wrong with this place, and it was getting worse as the sun went down. The wind picked up, and for just a moment, I thought I heard something else in it. Something that sounded almost like whispering, like voices calling to us from the dark forest. "We'll set up camp here tonight," I told Doug. "In the morning, we'll search for survivors." Doug nodded, but I could see the fear in his eyes. It matched what I was feeling in my own chest, a cold dread that had nothing to do with the weather. As we set up our emergency shelter, I kept looking over my shoulder at the dark trees around us. I had the feeling we were being watched, that something was out there in the shadows, waiting for us to make a mistake. I'd been hungry before, but I'd never been hunted. I was about to learn the difference. The first strange thing happened around midnight. I was lying in my sleeping bag, listening to Doug snore, when I heard footsteps in the snow outside our tent. Slow, careful steps, like someone trying not to wake us up. "Doug," I whispered, shaking his shoulder. He woke up fast, the way you do when you've been doing rescue work for years. "What is it?" "Someone's outside." We listened together. The footsteps continued in a circle around our tent. Step, pause, step, pause, like whoever it was had all the time in the world. Doug grabbed his flashlight and unzipped the tent flap. The beam cut through the darkness, but there was nothing there. Just our tracks from earlier, and the undisturbed snow. "Must have been the wind," he said, but he didn't sound convinced. In the morning, we found the tracks. They started at the edge of camp and walked in a perfect circle around our tent. At first, they looked like normal boot prints, but about halfway around the circle, they began to change. The prints got longer, deeper. The toe marks became claw marks. By the time the tracks completed the circle, they weren't human anymore. "What do you think made these?" Doug asked. I knelt down and measured one of the final prints with my hand. It was nearly 2 feet long, with 4 deep claw marks at the front. "I don't know," I said, "but it was big." We followed the trail of clothing we'd spotted the day before. It led deeper into the forest, away from the lake. First we found a jacket, then boots, then more clothes scattered in the snow, like someone had been undressing as they walked. The strange thing was, the clothes weren't torn or damaged. They'd been taken off carefully and dropped one by one. But in 40 below weather, taking off your clothes meant death in minutes. "Why would they strip down?" Doug asked. I remembered something from my medical training. Sometimes people with severe hypothermia start feeling hot. They take off their clothes right before they die. But even as I said it, I knew that wasn't right. These clothes were spread out over nearly a mile. No one could walk that far in this cold without winter gear. We found the first body around noon. It was one of the fishermen, a man in his 50s. He was lying face down in the snow, completely naked. At first, I thought he'd died of cold, like I'd expected. Then I rolled him over. His stomach was torn open, but not by an animal. The cuts were too clean, too precise, and his face had an expression I'd never seen before. Not pain or fear, but something like hunger, like he'd been starving for days. "Jesus," Doug whispered. "What happened to him?" I checked the body more carefully. There were bite marks on his arms and legs, but they were human bite marks. Someone had been chewing on him while he was still alive. "Doug," I said slowly, "I think he was eating himself." Doug stared at me. "That's impossible." I showed him the bite marks. The angle was wrong for another person to have made them. The man had somehow been biting his own arms and legs, tearing off pieces of his own flesh. "People don't do that," Doug said. "People don't do a lot of things," I replied, "until they're desperate enough." We kept following the trail. The tracks were getting stranger, more animal-like with each mile, and the temperature was dropping again, even though it was the middle of the day. That's when Doug started acting different. He kept checking his pack, counting and recounting our emergency food supplies. He'd take out an energy bar, stare at it for a long time, then put it back. "You hungry?" I asked. "No," he said quickly. "Just making sure we have enough." But I caught him hiding a package of beef jerky in his jacket pocket when he thought I wasn't looking. Around 3 in the afternoon, we found the second body. This one was worse. Much worse. It was another fisherman, but he'd been ... changed. His arms were longer than they should be, stretched out like someone had pulled on them. His fingers ended in black claws instead of nails. And his face was all wrong. The jaw was too big, filled with too many teeth. But the worst part was that he was still alive. He was lying on his side, making a soft chewing sound. When we got closer, I saw that he was eating handfuls of frozen dirt and pine needles, cramming them into his mouth like they were the best meal he'd ever tasted. "Help," he whispered when he saw us. "So hungry, can't stop eating." I knelt down beside him, trying to stay calm. "What's your name?" "Martin," he said between bites of dirt. "Martin Kowalski. Been so hungry for days. Everything tastes so good." Now, Doug backed away. "Kit, we need to get out of here." But I couldn't leave this man. Even if he was wrong somehow, he was still a person who needed help. "Martin, What happened to your group? He looked up at me with eyes that were too big for his face. We got hungry, so hungry, and then we found the old camp. What old camp? From the 30s. The logging camp. They left something behind. Something that was still hungry after all these years. Martin grabbed my arm with fingers. That felt like ice. Don't eat anything you find here. It makes you hungry for more. Makes you hungry for everything. He went back to eating dirt and pine needles. I tried to pull him away, but he was stronger than he looked. Much stronger. We're going to get you help, I told him. He laughed, and dirt fell out of his mouth. Too late for help. The hunger's got me now. It's got all of us. That's when I heard the howling. It came from deeper in the forest. A sound like wolves, but wrong somehow. Too deep, too long, too much. Like human voices screaming. Doug grabbed my arm. We're leaving now. I wanted to argue, but the howling was getting closer, and Martin had started laughing again. A sound that didn't belong in any human throat. We ran back toward our camp as fast as we could through the deep snow. Behind us, the howling grew louder, and I could hear other sounds too. Footsteps, lots of them, and they were following us. When we reached our tent, Doug immediately started packing up our gear. We're not staying here another night, he said. I wanted to agree, but something stopped me. Maybe it was my training, or maybe it was just stubbornness, but I couldn't leave those people out there, no matter what was happening to them. We can't abandon them, I said. Doug looked at me like I was crazy. Did you see what happened to that guy? Whatever's out there, it's not something we can help with first aid and blankets. He had a point. But as I listened to the howling in the distance, I realized something else. The sound was coming from all around us now. We weren't just dealing with one or two people who'd gone crazy from the cold. We were surrounded, and the sun was setting again. The attack came just after dark. I was trying to radio for help when something hit our tent like a freight train. The whole thing collapsed on top of us, and I could hear Doug yelling as he fought to get free from the tangled fabric. When I finally got out, there were shapes moving around our camp. They looked like people, but they moved wrong, too fast, too smooth, like they were sliding across the snow instead of walking. One of them came close enough for me to see it clearly in my flashlight beam. It had been human once, but now its arms hung down to its knees, and its face was stretched out like a wolf's snout. When it saw the light, it grinned at me with a mouth full of needle-sharp teeth. So hungry, it whispered in a voice like wind through dead leaves. Been hungry so long. I backed away, but there were more of them behind me. At least 6, maybe more. All of them had been changed the same way, stretched and twisted into something that wasn't quite human anymore. Doug was on his feet now, holding a flare gun. Stay back, he shouted. The things laughed, a sound like ice cracking. They spread out in a circle around us, moving closer step by step. That's when I noticed something strange. They weren't trying to attack us directly. They were herding us, pushing us toward the lake. The ice, I said to Doug. They want us on the ice. Doug fired the flare gun. The bright red light lit up the whole area, and I saw them clearly for the first time. There were 9 of them, all that was left of the fishing group. They'd been turned into something else, something that barely looked human anymore. The flare made them back away, but only for a moment. Then they started moving toward us again, and I could see hunger in their eyes, not just for food, but for something else, something they needed from us. We ran for the snowmobiles. Mine started, on the first try, but Doug's engine just clicked and died. He tried again and again while the creatures got closer. Get on, I yelled. Doug jumped on behind me just as the first creature reached us. Its claws scraped against the side of the snowmobile, leaving deep gouges in the metal. We roared away into the darkness, following the trail back toward the main road. But when we reached the place where the trail should have turned east, it wasn't there anymore. The forest had changed. Trees that had been small that morning were now massive. The trail we'd followed to get here was gone, replaced by dense underbrush. That looked like it had been growing for decades. And the cold was getting worse, so cold that ice was forming on the inside of my helmet. This is impossible, Doug shouted over the engine noise. I had to agree. Forests don't change overnight, but somehow, this one had. We kept driving, looking for any familiar landmark, but everything was different. The lake was bigger, the trees were older, and the snow was deeper. It was like we'd been transported to a different place, or a different time. That's when Doug started getting worse. He kept checking his pockets, pulling out the beef jerky he'd hidden earlier, but instead of eating it, He just stared at it, with this strange expression on his face. "You okay back there?" I called out. "Yeah," he said, but his voice sounded different, hungrier. When we stopped to check our bearings, I caught him licking the wrapper from the beef jerky, not eating the food, licking the empty wrapper like it was covered in something delicious. "Doug, what are you doing?" He looked up at me with guilty eyes. "I can taste it," he said, "even on the wrapper. It tastes so good." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. "When did you last eat?" "This morning, had some oatmeal and coffee." He licked the wrapper again. "But I'm so hungry now. Everything looks like food." He was staring at my jacket like it was a steak dinner. I backed away from him slowly. "Doug, you need to fight this. Whatever's happening to you, you need to fight it." But he wasn't listening. He was looking at his own hands now, turning them over like he was examining cuts of meat. "I wonder what I taste like," he said. That's when I knew I was in real trouble. I got back on the snowmobile and started the engine. Doug tried to grab me, but I pulled away just in time. His fingers had turned black at the tips, just like the other creatures. "Kit, wait," he called after me. "I'm so hungry. Just let me have a little bite." I drove away as fast as I could, leaving my partner behind in the snow. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but I knew he wasn't Doug anymore. He was turning into one of those things, and if I stayed, I'd be next. The snowmobile's headlight cut through the darkness as I searched for a way out of the forest. But every trail I found led deeper into the woods, and the temperature kept dropping. Then I saw the old camp. It was hidden in a valley between two hills, almost invisible under the snow. But I could make out the shapes of old buildings, the remains of a logging operation from decades ago. I almost drove past it, but something made me stop. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the knowledge that I was running out of fuel and options. The camp was older than I'd expected, much older. The buildings were made of logs that had turned black with age, and the snow around them was stained with something dark. I found a sign near what used to be the main gate. It was carved into a piece of wood that was so old it was almost falling apart. Kowalski Logging Camp established, 1932. Kowalski, the same name as the man we'd found eating dirt. I walked through the camp, shining my flashlight on the old buildings. Most of them had collapsed under the weight of decades of snow. But one building was still standing, a long, low structure that might have been a dining hall. The door was open. I knew I shouldn't go inside. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get back on the snowmobile and keep driving, but I needed to understand what was happening here. I needed to know what had changed those people into monsters. The inside of the building was worse than I'd imagined. The tables and chairs were still there, covered in dust and cobwebs, but the walls were covered in something else. Scratch marks, like desperate fingers, had been clawing at the wood. And in the center of the room was a pile of bones, human bones. They were old, yellowed with age, but they'd been cracked open and sucked clean. Around the pile were more scratch marks, and words carved into the floor. "So hungry, can't stop eating, help us." I was reading the carved words when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around and saw Doug standing in the doorway, but he wasn't Doug anymore. His face had stretched out like the others, and his teeth had turned into sharp points. His fingers ended in black claws, and his eyes were yellow like an animal's. "Found you," he said in a voice that was barely human. Behind him, I could see the other creatures from the fishing camp. All of them had followed me here, to this place where it had all started decades ago. "This is where it began," Doug said, stepping closer. "The loggers got snowed in during the winter of 1932. They ran out of food, started eating each other, but eating human flesh wasn't enough. They wanted more. They needed more. I backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The creatures were blocking the door. They found something in the hunger," Doug continued. "Something that had been waiting in the cold for centuries. Something that was always starving, always feeding, never satisfied." "What are you talking about?" I asked, though I was starting to understand. "The Wendigo," Doug said. "The hunger that walks on two legs. It possessed the loggers, made them into something new, something that could never be full. No matter how much they ate." The creatures started moving closer, surrounding me. I could smell them now, the scent of rotten meat and frozen earth. "We're going to share it with you," Doug said. "The wonderful hunger. You'll never be satisfied, but you'll never stop trying. You'll eat everything you can find, and then you'll eat yourself." One of the creatures reached out and touched my arm. Where its fingers made contact, I felt a sudden, overwhelming hunger. My stomach cramped like I hadn't eaten in weeks. "Just let it happen," Doug whispered. "It feels so good to be hungry, so good to always want more." But I remembered something from my childhood, something my grandmother had told me about dealing with real hunger. Sometimes, she'd said, the only way to beat hunger is to refuse to feed it. I pulled out my knife and cut a deep gash across my palm. The pain was sharp and immediate, cutting through the unnatural hunger like a blade. The creatures hissed and backed away. My blood was dripping onto the floor, and where it hit, the wood began to smoke. "You can't fight it forever," Doug said. "Everyone gets hungry eventually." He was right. I could feel the hunger growing stronger, even with the distraction of pain. Soon I'd be just like them, trapped in an endless cycle of need and consumption. But I had one more trick. I pulled out my emergency radio and turned it to the emergency frequency. If I was going to die here, at least I could warn people about this place. "Mayday, Mayday," I said into the radio. "This is Ranger Wolfram. Stay away from Lake Disappointment. There's something here." That the creatures rushed me all at once. But as they did, something strange happened. The radio began to emit a high-pitched whine, and bright light filled the room. The creatures screamed and covered their eyes. The light seemed to hurt them, like it was burning them from the inside out. I didn't understand what was happening, but I wasn't going to waste the opportunity. I ran for the door, pushing past the blinded creatures. Outside, I could hear them howling with rage and pain. But I was already on my snowmobile, driving away, as fast as I could. Behind me, the old camp began to burn. The light from my radio had somehow started a fire that was spreading from building to building. The creatures' howls grew louder and more desperate as the flames consumed their hiding place. I drove through the night, following the one trail that seemed to lead away from the nightmare. The hunger was still there, gnawing at me, but it was getting weaker as I got further from the camp. When dawn broke, I found myself back on the main road. The familiar landmarks were there again, and the forest looked normal. Whatever had been changed by the presence of those things was slowly returning to the way it should be. But I knew it wasn't over. Not really. The hunger was still inside me, waiting for a moment of weakness, and somewhere out there, in the deep woods, other people might stumble across what was left of that cursed place. I had to warn them. I had to make sure this never happened again. But first, I had to survive the hunger that was still eating at me from the inside. The official report said I was found 6 days later, wandering along Highway 61 in a state of severe hypothermia and malnutrition. They said I'd lost 30 pounds and was talking about things that didn't make sense. They were wrong about the things not making sense. The hunger followed me home, even after they'd fed me and warmed me up, even after the doctors said I was physically recovered. The need was still there. Every time I looked at food, I could hear whispering voices telling me it wasn't enough, that I needed more, that I should try eating other things. I started having dreams about the old logging camp. In the dreams, I was sitting at one of those dusty tables, and the lagers from 1932 were serving me dinner. But the food on my plate kept changing. Sometimes it was meat, sometimes it was dirt, sometimes it was pieces of myself. Just a little more, they'd say in voices like wind through frozen trees. Just one more bite. I'd wake up with my hands bleeding from where I'd been chewing on my own fingers in my sleep. The worst part was Doug. He'd been found too, but not the way I'd been found. Search teams discovered his body frozen solid 3 miles from the old camp, but he'd been ... changed. His arms were stretched longer than they should be, and his mouth was full of pine needles and frozen mud. The official cause of death was hypothermia and starvation, but I knew better. Doug had fed the hunger until it consumed him completely. I tried to tell people about what really happened. I filed reports, talked to my supervisors, even contacted researchers who studied folklore and unexplained phenomena. But nobody believed me. They said I'd suffered hallucinations from the cold and trauma, so I stopped talking about it. But I didn't stop thinking about it. 3 months after the incident, I was back on duty. Light duty, desk work mostly, while the department decided if I was fit for field work again. I was filing reports when the call came in, another missing person case. A family of 4 had gone cross-country skiing in the Superior National Forest and hadn't returned. Their last known location was near Lake Disappointment. I grabbed my coat and headed for the door, but my supervisor stopped me. "You're not going out there, Kit," he said. "Not to that area. Those people need help. Those people are probably already dead." and you're not ready for field work." He was right about me not being ready. The hunger was still there, still whispering to me, but he was wrong about those people being dead. They weren't dead yet. They were something worse. I went anyway. I took my personal truck and drove to the forest after dark. The roads were different than I remembered. Some trails that had been there before were gone, and new ones had appeared. But I found my way to Lake Disappointment. The old camp was gone. The fire had burned everything to the ground, leaving only charred stumps and ash-covered snow. But the presence was still there. I could feel it the moment I stepped out of my truck. The hunger hit me like a physical blow. My stomach cramped, and my mouth filled with saliva. Every sound in the forest sounded like food. The wind in the trees sounded like sizzling meat. The snow crunching under my feet sounded like crackling fat. I forced myself to keep walking. The missing family's ski tracks were easy to follow, leading from the lake toward the ruins of the camp. But as I followed them, I noticed they were changing. The tracks started out normal, but they gradually became something else. Deeper, wider, more animal-like. I found the families abandoned. Equipment first, skis, poles, backpacks, all dropped in the snow like they'd suddenly become too heavy to carry. Their food supplies were scattered around, but not eaten. Instead, they'd been torn apart, as if someone had been searching for something inside the packages that wasn't there. Then I heard the singing. It was coming from the direction of the burned camp, a low humming that sounded almost like a lullaby, but the melody was wrong somehow, like it was being sung by throats that weren't shaped for human music. I followed the sound and found them. The family was sitting in a circle in the middle of the burned ruins. The mother, father, and 2 children, all holding hands like they were having a picnic. But they'd been changed, just like the others. Their faces were stretched, their fingers ended in claws, and their eyes glowed yellow in the darkness. They were singing about being hungry. When they saw me, they stopped singing and smiled. Their teeth were sharp and black. "We've been waiting for you," the father said, in a voice like grinding stone. "The old ones told us you'd come back." "What old ones?" I asked, though I already knew. "The loggers. They're still here, in the hungry place between eating and starving. They told us about you, how you escaped, how you're still fighting the beautiful hunger." The mother stood up, and I could see that her stomach was torn open. But instead of blood and organs, there was just empty space inside her, like she was hollow. "You can't fight it forever," she said. "Everyone eats eventually." The children giggled, and the sound made my skin crawl. They were maybe 8 and 10 years old, but their eyes were ancient and hungry. "We ate Daddy's fingers," the little girl said. "They tasted like chicken. Then we ate Mommy's toes," the boy added. "They were better. But we're still hungry," they said together. "We're always hungry now." The father reached into his jacket and pulled out something that made my blood freeze. It was a piece of charred wood from the old camp, carved with symbols that hurt to look at. "This is what called to us," he said. "What made us hungry. The old loggers left it behind when they burned. A piece of the thing that possessed them. The thing that's been waiting here for decades." He held the wood out to me. "Touch it," he said. "Let it in. Stop fighting and just be hungry with us." I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The hunger was too strong now, pulling at me like a rope around my chest. I could smell the carved wood, and it smelled like the most delicious thing I'd ever encountered. "Just touch it," the mother said. "Then you'll understand. Hunger is beautiful. Hunger is pure. Hunger is all you need." I reached out toward the wood. My fingers were inches away when I remembered something else my grandmother had told me. The thing about real hunger, she'd said, is that it can be satisfied. But false hunger, the kind that comes from inside your head, that hunger will eat you alive if you let it. I pulled my hand back and looked at the family. They weren't really hungry. They were possessed by something that was using hunger as a weapon. "No," I said. The family's smiles disappeared. "You have to," the father said. "Everyone who comes here has to choose. Feed the hunger or be fed to it. I choose neither." I turned around and started walking away. Behind me, I heard the family start to scream, but I kept walking. The screaming got louder and more desperate. I could hear them following me, their claws scraping against the frozen ground, but I didn't run. I just kept walking at a steady pace, refusing to give in to fear or hunger. When I reached my truck, I looked back. The family was standing at the edge of the burned camp, watching me with their yellow eyes, but they weren't following anymore. They couldn't leave the cursed ground. "You'll be back," the father called out. "When you get hungry enough, you'll be back." I got in my truck and drove away. In my rearview mirror, I could see them standing there in the darkness, waiting for the next person to stumble into their trap. But they were wrong about me coming back. I had found something stronger than their hunger. I had found the power to say no. That was 45 years ago. I'm 80 now, and I've never gone back to Lake Disappointment. But I've never stopped thinking about it either. The hunger is still there. Not as strong as it was, but it never completely went away. Sometimes, late at night, more than that, I've learned to use it. After the incident, I quit the Park Service and opened a soup kitchen in Duluth. I called it the Winter Feast, and for 30 years I served free meals to anyone who needed them. Homeless people, struggling families, anyone who was truly hungry. The ironic thing is, feeding other people helped quiet the supernatural hunger inside me. Every bowl of soup I served, every sandwich I made, every person I helped, it pushed back against the thing that was trying to consume me from the inside. I retired from the soup kitchen 5 years ago, but I still volunteer there twice a week. The new owners don't know the real reason I started the place. They think I'm just a nice old lady who likes to help people. If only they knew. The missing persons reports never stopped. Every winter, someone disappears near Lake Disappointment. The Park Service has closed the area permanently now, but that doesn't stop people from hiking in. Hunters, campers, thrill seekers, looking for adventure. Most of them come back out eventually, but some don't. I keep track of the reports. It's become a hobby of mine in retirement. When someone goes missing in that area, I know they've encountered the same thing I did. The question is whether they'll be strong enough to resist it. Most aren't. Last month, I got a call from a young park ranger named Sarah Chen. She'd heard about my experience in 1977 and wanted to ask me some questions. She was investigating a new disappearance, a group of college students who'd gone snowshoeing near the lake. "I know this sounds crazy," she said, "but I found their campsite, and it looked just like what you described in your report. Food left, untouched, equipment scattered around, bite marks on metal cans." I invited her over for coffee. She was maybe 25, eager and professional. She reminded me of myself at that age. "What did you really see out there?" she asked. I told her the truth, all of it. The transformed people, the old logging camp, the hunger that possessed anyone who stayed too long in that cursed place. She listened without interrupting, taking notes in a small notebook. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "Do you think those students are still alive?" she asked finally. "Probably, but they're not human anymore. What should I do?" I poured her another cup of coffee and thought about my answer. I'd been asked this question before, by other rangers who'd encountered things they couldn't explain. "Don't go back there alone," I told her. "And don't go back there hungry." "What do you mean?" "The thing that lives in that place, it feeds on desperation, on real need. If you're truly hungry, truly desperate, it can get inside your head. But if you're well fed, if you're content, it has less power over you." Sarah nodded, writing this down. "Anything else?" "Fire," I said. "It doesn't like fire. And light. When I used my emergency radio that night, it gave off some kind of light that hurt those things. I don't know why, but it seemed to weaken them." She finished her coffee and stood up to leave. At the door, she turned back to me. "Why are you telling me this? Your official report was classified. You could get in trouble for sharing details." I smiled. "I'm 80 years old. What are they going to do? Fire me?" But the real reason was simpler. I'd been carrying this secret for years, and it was time to pass it on to someone who might be able to use it. Sarah went back to Lake Disappointment 2 weeks later. She took a full team with her 6 rangers, emergency equipment, and enough supplies to last a week. They found the college students. All 4 of them were alive, but they'd been changed. Just like the fishing group, just like Doug, they'd been transformed into something that was no longer quite human. The rescue team managed to tranquilize them and bring them out, but the students had to be kept in a special facility. They couldn't be around normal people anymore. The hunger had gotten too deep inside them. Sarah called me after they returned. "We found something else," she said. "In the ruins of the old camp. A journal from 1932, written by one of the loggers." "What did it say?" "The same thing you told me. They got snowed in, ran out of food, started eating each other. But the journal writer said something else. He said the hunger didn't come from desperation. It came from something that had been sleeping in the ground for centuries, something that woke up when they spilled human blood on the frozen earth. I felt a chill run down my spine. Did the journal say what it was? He called it the Wendigo, an old Native American legend about a creature that possesses people and makes them cannibals. But this wasn't just folklore. The logger described it as something real, something that could spread like a disease. After Sarah hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, thinking about what she'd told me. The Wendigo. I'd heard that name before. In stories my grandmother had told me about the old country. She'd called it something else, the hunger devil, but it was the same thing. A creature that fed on human desperation and turned people into monsters. The next day, I drove to the library and started researching. I found more stories, dating back hundreds of years. Native American tribes had known about it, and so had European settlers. Always the same pattern. People trapped by winter, running out of food, turning to cannibalism, then becoming something else entirely. The creature moved from place to place, following the cold and the hunger. Lake Disappointment was just its latest feeding ground, but I also found something else. Stories of people who had fought back, shamans and priests who had found ways to contain it, to keep it from spreading. Most of the methods involved fire and light, just like I'd discovered accidentally. I spent the next month documenting everything I'd learned. I wrote it all down, the encounter in 1977, the research I'd done, the methods that might work against the creature. Then I sent copies to Sarah and to several other people who might need the information someday, because I knew it wasn't over. The Wendigo was still out there, still hungry, still looking for its next victims, and someday, someone else would have to face it. Sarah retired from the Park Service last year. She's running a youth camp now, teaching kids about wilderness survival. She calls me sometimes to check in, and we talk about normal things, the weather, her family, my volunteer work. But sometimes, late at night, she calls to tell me about new reports. Missing hikers, unexplained disappearances, signs that the hunger is spreading to new places. It's moving north, she told me last month, into Canada. There have been 3 incidents in the past year that match the pattern. What are the Canadian authorities doing about it? Nothing. They don't believe it's real. I sighed. It was the same story I'd faced 45 years ago. People don't want to believe in monsters, even when the monsters are eating their friends and family. Keep documenting everything, I told her. Someday, someone will listen. What about you? Are you still hungry? I finished for her. Every day, but I've learned to live with it. That's the truth. The supernatural hunger never completely goes away. It's always there, whispering in the back of my mind, telling me that I need more, that I deserve more, that I should take more. But I've found ways to fight it. I volunteer at the soup kitchen. I donate to food banks. I help people who are truly hungry. And every time I do, it pushes back against the thing that's trying to consume me. It's not a perfect solution. Some days are harder than others. Some nights I wake up dreaming about eating things that shouldn't be eaten. But I've survived 45 years, and I plan to survive 45 more. The young ranger who called me yesterday doesn't know any of this yet. Her name is Maria Santos, and she's investigating a new disappearance near Lake Disappointment. She's heard stories about my experience and wants to meet with me. I told her to come over this weekend. I'll make coffee, tell her the truth, and pass on everything I've learned about fighting the hunger. Because that's how it works. The knowledge gets passed down from one person to the next, like a torch being carried through the darkness. Each person who faces the Wendigo and survives becomes a guardian, someone who can warn others and teach them how to fight. It's not the life I planned when I became a park ranger, but it's the life I've been given, and I've learned to make peace with it. The hunger will always be there, but so will the knowledge of how to resist it, and sometimes that's enough. My name is Mike Ravencrest, and I've been a park ranger at Mesa Verde National Park for 11 years. People think being a ranger is all about helping lost tourists and fighting forest fires. But here in southwestern Colorado, my job is different. I protect some of the oldest ruins in North America, ancient cliff dwellings built by the ancestral Puebloan people over 800 years ago. I didn't just stumble into this job. I have a PhD in anthropology, and I've spent most of my adult life studying Native American cultures of the Southwest. The Navajo call this place sacred, but they also call it dangerous. They have stories about face changes that hide among the ruins, waiting for the right moment to steal your identity and walk away wearing your life like a costume. I used to think those were just old stories, the kind anthropologists catalogue and analyze. I studied skinwalker legends academically until I met one personally. Mesa Verde sits on high desert mesas, red sandstone cliffs that rise like ancient fortresses from the valley floor. The cliff dwellings are tucked into natural caves in the rock face, some so high you need ropes and climbing gear to reach them. It's beautiful country, but it's also isolated. The nearest town is 40 miles away, and some of these mesa tops, it can only be reached by hiking for hours through rough terrain. That isolation is exactly what makes Mesa Verde perfect for hiding secrets, and some secrets should stay buried. I work with Janet Yellowbird, a Navajo cultural liaison, who grew up hearing the old stories from her grandmother. Janet helps me make sure we treat the ancient sites with proper respect. She's smart, tough, and knows more about traditional Navajo ways than most university professors. She also takes the warnings about this place seriously in ways I used to think were superstitious. The morning everything changed started like any other. I was in my office at the visitor center, going through reports from the previous day's tours, when Janet knocked on my door. She looked worried, which wasn't like her. "Mike, we have a problem," she said, holding up a manila envelope. "A tourist turned in some photos yesterday. Photos you need to see." The tourist was a photographer from Denver named Robert Chen. Been taking pictures at Balcony House, one of our most popular cliff-dwelling sites. Digital photography was still new in 1984, but Chen had expensive equipment and knew how to use it. He'd captured dozens of shots of the ancient rooms and doorways. Janet spread the photos across my desk. They showed the usual tourist shot: stone walls, wooden ladders, the view across the canyon, but in 3 different photos, taken from different angles and at different times. There was something that made my skin crawl. A figure stood in one of the ancient doorways. It looked like a person wearing traditional clothing, but something was wrong with its face. In the first photo, it had the face of an elderly Navajo woman. In the second, taken 20 minutes later, according to the timestamp, it had the face of a young white man. In the third photo, it wore the face of a child. "Trick photography," I said, though even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. Chen wasn't the type to fake paranormal photos. He was a serious photographer, documenting historical sites. Janet shook her head. "Look at the clothing. Same outfit in all 3 shots. Same body posture. Same hands. Only the face changes." She was right. The figure wore identical, traditional buckskin clothing in each photo, stood in exactly the same position, held its hands the same way. Only the face was different hand in each case. The face looked completely real, not like a mask or makeup. "Where's Chen now?" I asked. "That's the other problem," Janet said quietly. "The hotel called this morning. He never checked out. His rental car is still in our parking lot." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. In 11 years at Mesa Verde, we'd had our share of missing hikers and lost tourists, but they usually turned up within a day or 2. The high desert is dangerous if you don't know what you're doing, but it's not that big. We had search and rescue teams, helicopters, tracking dogs. We found people. But as Janet gathered up the photos, I noticed something else that made my stomach turn. In each shot, the figure in the doorway seemed to be looking directly at the camera, not just in the general direction directly at it, as if it knew exactly where Chen was standing and exactly when he would press the shutter button, as if it wanted to be photographed. "We need to organize a search," I said, reaching for my radio. Janet caught my arm. "Mike, there's something else. My grandmother used to tell stories about this place. She said there are things here that wear human faces like clothes, changing them whenever they get tired of one. She said they hunt by studying people first, learning how they move and talk, and then they take their place." I looked at the photos again. 3 different faces, but the same calculating stare in each one. "Those are just stories, Janet, are they?" She pointed to the photo of the figure wearing a child's face. "Because that child looks familiar. I think I've seen that face before, in old newspaper clippings about missing persons cases from the 1960s. That's when I realized we weren't just dealing with a missing tourist. We were dealing with something that had been hunting at Mesa Verde for a very long time. The search for Robert Chen began at dawn the next day. I led a team of 4 rangers and 2 search dogs up the trail to Balcony House. The morning air was crisp and clear, with that thin quality you only get at high altitude. Ravens circled overhead, but something was wrong with their behavior. Instead of their usual confident cawing, They made nervous clicking sounds and kept their distance from the cliff dwellings. Janet walked beside me, carrying traditional items. Her grandmother had given her cornmeal, sage, and small carved fetishes for protection. I'd seen her carry these things before on sensitive cultural sites, but today she clutched them like they were weapons. "The birds know," she said, watching the circling ravens. "Animals can sense wrongness better than people can." We reached a balcony house just as the sun cleared the eastern rim of the canyon. The ancient stone rooms looked exactly as they had for centuries, but something felt different. The air seemed thicker, like breathing through cloth. The dogs whined and pulled. Back from the cliff-dwelling entrance, their hackles raised. "That's not normal behavior," said Ranger Tom Martinez, one of the younger guys on our team. "These dogs have worked dozens of searches here. They've never acted scared before." I checked Chun's photos again, comparing them to the actual site. He'd been standing at the main viewing area when he took the pictures. The figure in the photos had been in the doorway of what we called Room 12, a small storage chamber about 30 feet from where Chen would have been standing. "Janet and I will check Room 12, I announced. "The rest of you spread out and look for any sign of Chung clothing, equipment, anything unusual." The climb to Room 12 required a wooden ladder that the Park Service had installed for maintenance. Access. As Janet and I climbed, I noticed something that made my hands shake on the rungs. There were scratches in the ancient stone around the doorway. Fresh scratches that looked like they'd been made by fingernails. Human fingernails. "Mike," Janet whispered from above me. "Look at this." She was crouched in the doorway, holding something up to the light. It was a piece of skin, pale and thin, caught on a rough edge of the stone doorframe. But it wasn't just any skin, it was facial skin, complete with part of an eyebrow and what looked like the corner of a mouth. "That's impossible," I said. "Skin doesn't just shed like that, not unless ... Unless something was changing faces," Janet finished. "Like taking off a mask, but the mask is made of human skin." I keyed my radio. "All units, this is Ravencrest. I need everyone to stop what they're doing and listen carefully. We may be dealing with something more dangerous than a lost tourist. I want everyone to stay in pairs, keep visual contact at all times, and report anything unusual immediately." Tom's voice crackled back over the radio. "Mike, you need to see this. We found Chen." We climbed down from Room 12 and followed Tom's voice to a narrow alcove behind the main structure. Robert Chen was there, but he wasn't lost. He was dead, positioned sitting upright against the stone wall with his legs crossed and his hands folded in his lap. His camera hung around his neck, but the memory card was missing. What made my blood freeze wasn't just that Chen was dead, it was how he'd been positioned. Janet recognized it immediately. "This is ritual placement," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Navajo burial position, but wrong, backward. This is how you'd place a body if you wanted to trap the spirit instead of helping it move on." Chun's face was intact, but something about it looked wrong. The skin seemed loose around the edges, like it didn't quite fit properly. His eyes were open but cloudy, and there was an expression of absolute terror frozen on his features. "How long has he been dead?" asked Tom. I knelt beside the body. Chen's skin was cold, but not stiff. Maybe 12 hours. He died sometime yesterday evening after he turned in those photos. "Mike," Janet called from a few feet away. "Look at this." She was pointing at the ground near Chen's feet. In the sandy soil, there were tracks, bare human footprints leading away from the body, but the prints changed as they went. The first few looked like they belonged to a man about Chen's size. Then they got smaller, more delicate, like a woman's feet. Then larger again, with longer toes, as if whatever made them was changing its body as it walked. I followed the tracks for about 20 yards before they disappeared onto solid rock. But where they ended, there was something that made me question my own sanity. Another piece of shed skin, larger this time, big enough to be from someone's entire face. "Everyone back to the visitor center," I ordered. "Now, what about Chen?" Tom asked. "We'll call the county coroner and let them handle the body. But nobody goes anywhere alone from now on. And I mean nobody." As we hiked back down the trail, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Several times I turned around, certain I'd see someone following us, but there was never anyone there. Just the ancient cliff dwellings, staring down at us with their empty windows like dead eyes. That night, I sat in my office going through every missing person report filed at Mesa Verde in the past 20 years. What I found made me understand why Janet's grandmother had warned people about this place. 17 unsolved disappearances in 2 decades, all tourists or hikers, all last seen near the cliff dwelling sites, and in 6 cases, witnesses reported seeing the missing person days after they'd disappeared, walking around the park as if nothing had happened. But when authorities tried to question these survivors, they could never be found. I was beginning to understand that Robert Chen wasn't the first person to meet the thing that lived in room 12. He was just the first one to photograph it before it killed him, and now it had his face to add to its collection. The next morning brought news that made everything worse. Janet arrived at my office with a grim expression and a newspaper clipping in her hand. "Remember that child's face from Chen's photos?" she said, spreading the clipping on my desk. "I found this in the local library's archives." The newspaper was from 1967, yellowed with age. The headline read, "Boy, 8, missing during family camping trip." Below it was a photo of a smiling child, the same face we'd seen in Chen's photograph of the figure in room 12. Tommy Beggett, Janet Reed, disappeared while his family was camping near Mesa Verde. Never found. That was 17 years ago, Mike, and this thing is still wearing his face. I stared at the newspaper photo. The child looked happy, innocent, full of life. The idea that something was using his appearance to hunt other people made me sick. My radio crackled. "Ravencrest, this is Martinez. We have another situation at Balcony House. You need to get up here right away." Janet and I grabbed our gear and headed back up the trail. This time, the wrongness in the air was so thick it was hard to breathe. Even the wind seemed different, carrying sounds that didn't make sense, voices speaking in languages I couldn't identify, footsteps on stone where no one was walking. We found Tom standing at the main viewing area, staring at the cliff dwelling with a confused expression. "What's the problem?" I asked. "The rooms," Tom said slowly. "They're different. The layout is different from yesterday." I looked at Balcony House and felt my world tilt. Tom was right. The arrangement of doorways and windows had changed. Passages that led nowhere yesterday now opened into new rooms. Doorways that had been blocked with stone for centuries were now open. The entire structure seemed to have rearranged itself overnight. "That's impossible," I said. But even as I spoke, I watched the stone wall shift slightly, like it was breathing. Janet pulled out her grandmother's cornmeal and began sprinkling it in a circle around us. "We need protection," she said. "Whatever lives here is getting stronger." That's when we heard the voices. They came from inside the cliff dwelling, carried on the wind. Human voices, speaking English, having normal conversations. But as we listened more carefully, the conversations didn't make sense. It was like hearing fragments of different people talking at different times, all layered together. "Help me find my camera. I think I dropped it. Such beautiful work. How did they build this without Mummy? Where did that man go?" "He was just here. Those are tourists," Tom said. "People on guided tours, but we all knew there were no guided tours scheduled today." And some of those voices sounded old, like recordings from decades past. I recognized equipment terminology that hadn't been used since the 1960s, phrases that modern tourists wouldn't know. "It's not just wearing their faces," Janet whispered. "It's keeping their voices too, like a collection." The voices got louder, more urgent. Soon we could hear dozens of people talking at once, all from inside the cliff dwelling. Men, women, children, elderly people, all the voices of people who'd disappeared at Mesa Verde over the years. Then, cutting through all the other sounds, we heard something that made my blood freeze. Robert Chen's voice, clear as if he was standing right next to us. "Mike, Janet, is that you? I'm lost in here. Can you help me find the way out?" I started toward the cliff dwelling, but Janet grabbed my arm. "That's not Chen," she said firmly. "Chen is dead. Whatever that is, it's not human." But Chen's voice continued, now with a note of panic. "Please, I can see you out there. I've been trapped in here all night. The passages keep changing. I can't find the exit." Tom took a step forward. "Maybe he's not dead. Maybe we were wrong yesterday." "Tom, stop," I ordered. "Stay in the circle." But it was too late. Tom was already walking toward the cliff dwelling, drawn by Chen's pleading voice. As he got closer to the entrance, the voice changed, became more manipulative. "Tom, thank God you're here. I'm hurt. I think my leg is broken. I'm in room 12, just like in the photos. Please, I need help." I watched Tom disappear into the cliff dwelling and knew I'd never see him alive again. For the next hour, we heard Tom's voice joining the chorus inside the ruins. First, he was calling for help. Then, he was screaming. Then, finally, his voice became calm and friendly, just like all the others. Mike, Janet, you should come in here. It's amazing what you can see from inside. The stonework is incredible. You're missing so much by staying out there. That's when I understood the true horror of what we were dealing with. This thing didn't just kill people and steal their faces. It absorbed them completely, keeping their voices, their memories, their personalities as part of itself. Every person who disappeared at Mesa Verde was still here, in a way, trapped forever as part of the creature's collection. And now it had Tom too. We need to leave, Janet said. Now, before it decides to come out here. But as we started back down the trail, I realized our problems were just beginning. Because walking toward us on the path was Tom Martinez, looking perfectly normal and healthy. "Hey Mike, Janet," he called out, with a friendly wave. "Sorry, I took so long. I found Chen inside, and we've been talking. He's fine, just confused. You want to come see?" I stared at Tomor, the thing wearing Tom's face. It looked exactly like him, moved like him, even wore his ranger uniform. But the eyes were wrong. They held an intelligence that was too old, too calculating, too hungry. "Tom's inside room 12, I said carefully. We just heard his voice. The thing wearing Tom's face smiled, and for just a moment, the smile was too wide, showing too many teeth. "Oh, that," it said casually. "Echo effects in the stone chambers. Sound carries weird up there. I was calling from outside, but it sounded like I was inside. You know how acoustics work in these old places." It was a reasonable explanation. If I hadn't seen the shed skin, hadn't heard the impossible chorus of voices, hadn't watched the stone walls rearrange themselves, I might have believed it. Janet was backing away slowly, her hand on her bag of protective items. "Tom," she said carefully, "what's your grandmother's middle name?" The thing paused for just a fraction of a second too long. "Maria," it said. "Grandmother Maria Martinez. Tom's grandmother's name is Susan," Janet whispered to me. "And she's not Latina, she's Irish." The thing wearing Tom's face stopped smiling. Its features began to shift slightly, becoming less defined, as if it was having trouble maintaining the disguise. "Run," I told Janet. We turned and sprinted down the trail, leaving the creature behind us. But as we ran, I could hear it calling after us in Tom's voice, then Chen's voice, then the voice of the missing child from 1967. "Mike, Janet, come back. We're all friends here. We want to be together." We didn't stop running until we reached the visitor center, and even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following us. Every shadow looked like it might hide a figure with a stolen face. Every reflection in the windows seemed to show someone who wasn't quite right. That night, I called the state police and told them we had multiple missing persons and needed immediate assistance. But when they arrived the next morning, they brought news that made everything infinitely worse. "We found your missing ranger," the detective told me. "Tom Martinez. He was discovered this morning in his apartment in town. Been dead for at least 2 days." I stared at him. "That's impossible. I saw Tom yesterday morning. He was working the search for Robert Chen." The detective shook his head. "Medical examiner says Martinez has been dead since Tuesday night. And here's the strange part. His face is missing. Cut away clean, like someone removed it with surgical precision." I looked out the window at the cliff dwellings rising from the desert like ancient guardians. Somewhere up there, something was wearing Tom's face, probably talking to tourists right now, pretending to be a helpful park ranger. And I was the only one who knew the truth. For 3 days after Tom's body was found, I couldn't trust anyone. The thing could be anyone, a tourist, a co-worker, even Janet. I stayed in my office, checking and rechecking everyone who came through the visitor center, looking for the telltale signs of wrongness. But the signs were getting harder to spot. The creature was learning, getting better at mimicking human behavior. On Thursday morning, Janet knocked on my office door. She looked tired and scared, just like I felt. But was it really Janet? "Mike, we need to talk," she said. "I've been researching in the tribal archives. I think I know what we're dealing with." I studied her face carefully. The same dark eyes, the same scar on her chin from a childhood accident she'd told me about years ago. But that didn't mean anything. The creature could have absorbed those memories, along with everything else. "Stay where I can see you," I said. keeping my hand on the can of pepper spray attached to my belt. And tell me something only the real Janet would know. She looked hurt, but nodded. 3 months ago, you told me about your ex-wife, Sarah, how she left because she said you loved old stones more than living people. You were drunk, and you cried. You made me promise never to tell anyone. That was true. Only Janet knew about that conversation. But then again, if the creature had absorbed her memories, you're going to have to do better than that, I said. Janet sighed and pulled something from her pocket. It was a small carved bear fetish made from black stone. My grandmother gave this to me when I was 7 years old, she said. She told me it would protect me from skinwalkers. I've carried it ever since, but I've never shown it to anyone, not even you. She set the fetish on my desk. The moment it touched the wood, I felt a change in the air. The oppressive weight that had been pressing down on the visitor center for days seemed to lift slightly. It's really you, I said, relief flooding through me. Yes, it's really me. And Mike, we're in terrible danger. I know what this thing is, and I know how to stop it, but it won't be easy. Janet opened a leather-bound journal filled with handwritten notes in both English and Navajo. According to my grandmother's records, there have been skinwalkers at Mesa Verde for over a century. But this one is different. It's not just a witch who learned to shapeshift. It's something older, something that was here before the ancestral Puebloan people built the cliff dwellings. She pointed to a page covered with symbols I didn't recognize. The stories say it was bound to this place long ago by powerful medicine. It can't leave the mesa, but it can't die either. It survives by taking new faces, new identities. Every time someone disappears here, it grows stronger. How do we stop it? The binding can be renewed, but it requires a specific ritual, and someone has to confront the creature directly, force it to show its true form. That breaks its power, temporarily, long enough to complete the binding. I looked at the symbols in her journal. They seemed to shift and move on the page, like living things. What does it really look like? I asked. No one knows for sure. The stories say it has no true form of its own anymore. It's existed so long by wearing other faces that it's forgotten what it originally was. But when it's forced to drop all its disguises, it becomes something horrible, a thing that should not exist. My radio crackled with an incoming call. The voice was calm and professional, clearly belonging to a park ranger. Ravencrest, this is Martinez. I'm up at Balcony House with a group of tourists. We have a situation here. Can you respond? I stared at the radio. Tom Martinez was dead. We'd attended his funeral 2 days ago. Mike, Janet whispered. It knows. We're here. It's trying to draw us out. The radio crackled again. This time the voice was different. Robert Chen, the photographer. Mike, this is Chen. I'm okay. I was just lost for a few days. I'm here with Ranger Martinez. We found something amazing in room 12. You need to see this. Then a child's voice, high and innocent. Mr. Mike, I'm scared. The ranger man says he's going to help me find my mummy, but he looks wrong. Can you come help me? Janet was already gathering her ritual items, cornmeal, sage, turquoise beads, and several carved fetishes, including the black bear. It's time, she said. We end this today, or it kills us both and adds our faces to its collection. We hiked up to Balcony House as the afternoon sun began to sink toward the western horizon. The air grew thicker with each step, and by the time we reached the cliff dwelling, it felt like breathing soup. The ancient stone rooms were crowded with impossible figures. Tom Martinez stood at the main entrance, waving us forward with a friendly smile. Robert Chen sat on a low wall, cleaning his camera. A small boy played with stone tools in one of the rooms. At least a dozen other people wandered through the ruins, all of them wearing the faces of people who'd disappeared at Mesa Verde over the decades. But they all moved wrong. Too stiff, like puppets controlled by someone who didn't quite understand how human joints worked, and their eyes, all of their eyes, held the same ancient, hungry intelligence. Welcome, called Tom Noctum. We've been waiting for you. Come see what we found in room 12. Janet began sprinkling cornmeal in a wide circle, chanting softly in Navajo. The figures stopped moving and turned to watch her with identical expressions of sudden concern. What are you doing? Asked Chenuchin. That's not necessary. We're all friends here. Show us your true form, I called out, my voice echoing off the stone walls. Stop hiding behind stolen faces. The figures all smiled at once, the same too wide smile showing too many teeth. We don't know what you mean, they said in unison, their voices blending into an impossible harmony. "These are our faces. We've always looked like this." Janet finished her circle and began a new chanting, her voice growing stronger. The carved fetishes in her hands began to glow with soft light. That's when the creature finally dropped its pretense. All the figures collapsed like empty clothes, leaving nothing but piles of shed skins scattered across the ancient floor. From somewhere deep in the ruins came a sound like breaking glass and screaming wind. What emerged from room 12 was nothing that should exist in our world. It had no fixed shape, constantly shifting between forms, sometimes humanoid, sometimes animal, sometimes just a writhing mass of shadow and hunger. Pieces of faces appeared and disappeared across its surface like reflections in dark water. I saw Tom's face, Chen's face, the missing child's face, and dozens of others, all screaming silently as they were absorbed and released, and absorbed again. The creatures spoke with all their voices at once. "You cannot stop us. We are eternal. We are everyone who has ever walked this place. We are the hungry dark that existed before your light." Janet's chanting reached a crescendo, and the fetishes in her hands blazed like small suns. The creature recoiled, its stolen faces howling. In unison, the binding, Janet shouted over the noise. "I need to complete the binding ritual." The creature surged toward us, and I did the only thing I could think of. I stepped forward, directly into its path, forcing it to focus on me instead of Janet. It was like being touched by living nightmare, cold beyond description, empty beyond comprehension. For a moment, I felt my own identity being pulled away, absorbed into its collection. I saw through the eyes of every person it had ever consumed, felt their final moments of terror as they realized what was happening. But I also felt something else: weakness. The creature was old and powerful, but the binding ritual was working. Its hold on this place was loosening. "Now!" I screamed. Janet completed the ritual, pressing the black bear fetish into a crack in the ancient stone wall. Light exploded from the carving, racing through veins in the rock like liquid fire. The creature shrieked a sound that came from every stolen throat at once and collapsed in on itself. The faces it had worn faded away, leaving only empty darkness that quickly dissipated in the ritual light. For a moment, the cliff dwelling was filled with other sounds, whispers of gratitude from the spirits of everyone who had been trapped there. Then silence, peaceful and complete. It was over. The official report blamed the deaths of Robert Chen and Tom Martinez on a serial killer who was never identified or caught. The FBI investigated for months but found no evidence beyond the bodies. The strange photographs were dismissed as hoaxes, and the shed skin samples somehow disappeared from the evidence locker. I didn't fight the official story. Some truths are too dangerous to tell. Janet and I never talked about what really happened that day at Balcony House. We didn't need to. We both carried the memory of those stolen faces, those trapped voices, crying out for release. That was burden enough. I left my job as a park ranger 3 months later. I couldn't walk through Mesa Verde anymore without hearing echoes of the creature's victims. Every tourist I met, I wondered if they might be something else, wearing a human face. I moved to Santa Fe and opened a small shop selling Native American crafts, working with local artisans to make sure their traditional ways are respected and preserved. Janet visits sometimes. She never goes back to Mesa Verde either. The Park Service restricted access to several areas of the cliff dwellings after our incident, citing structural instability and archaeological sensitivity. They posted new signs, warning visitors to stay on designated trails and never enter the ruins alone. Most people think it's just standard bureaucratic caution, but if you look carefully at those signs, you'll notice they're written in 3 languages: English, Spanish, and Navajo. The Navajo text doesn't just warn about staying on trails. It warns about things that wear human faces, things that hunt by pretending to be someone you know. The local Navajo community knows what those signs really mean. They've always known about the dangers at Mesa Verde. Now the Park Service officially acknowledges those dangers too, even if they can't publicly admit what they're protecting people from. Sometimes I get calls from other park rangers around the Southwest, asking for advice about unusual incidents at historical sites, missing tourists, strange photographs, reports of people being seen after they've officially disappeared. I give them Janet's number and tell them to take any Navajo warnings seriously, because the creature we stopped at Mesa Verde wasn't unique. It was just one of many things that hide in the ancient places of the Southwest, waiting for the right moment. to add new faces to their collections. 6 months ago, I got a letter from a park ranger at Canyon de Chelly in Arizona. He'd found shed skin caught on ancient doorways and heard voices speaking from empty ruins. His letter included a photograph that made my hands shake. A figure standing in one of the cliff dwellings, wearing a face that looked almost human, but not quite right. The same calculating stare, the same predatory patience. I wrote back immediately, giving him Janet's contact information and every piece of advice I could think of. I told him to trust his instincts, to take protective measures seriously, and to never, ever go into the ruins alone. But mostly, I told him what I wish someone had told me before that first day at Balcony House. If someone you know starts looking wrong, if their eyes seem different, if they move in ways that don't quite match your memory, if they know things they shouldn't know or fail to remember things they should, trust that feeling. Don't rationalize it away. Don't tell yourself you're being paranoid, because there are still things out there that collect human faces like trophies, and the only warning you might get is that tiny voice in your head saying something isn't right. Listen to that voice. It might save your life. And if you ever visit Mesa Verde, stick to the marked trails, travel in groups, and pay attention to the warning signs. All of them, especially the ones written in Navajo. Some places are meant to be respected from a distance. Some secrets are meant to stay buried, and some faces are meant to belong to only one person. Mike Ravencrest lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where he runs a small gallery featuring traditional Native American crafts. He has never returned to Mesa Verde National Park. My name is Charles Griswold, but everyone calls me Chuck. I've been a park ranger at Redwood National Park for 17 years now, and before that, I spent 12 years cutting down the very trees I now protect. I know that sounds crazy, but life has a way of changing you in ways you never expect. Back in the late 50s and early 60s, I worked for Pacific Lumber Company. We'd roll into a forest with our saws screaming and our trucks rumbling, and by the end of the week, centuries of growth would be stacked like matchsticks on flatbed trailers. I was good at my job. Too good, maybe. I could drop a 200-foot giant within inches of where I wanted it to fall. But something happened in 1964 that changed everything. We were working a section near what's now the protected grove, and I watched my crew take down a redwood that had been growing since before Christ walked the earth. As it fell, I swear I heard it scream, not like wind through branches, but like something alive and in pain. My foreman laughed when I told him, said it was just the wood splitting, but I knew better. That's when I hung up my chainsaw and picked up a ranger badge. Now, at 39, I spend my days protecting what I once destroyed. The deep groves are my specialty, the ancient sections where some trees have stood for over 2,000 years. These aren't just trees, they're living cathedrals. Walk among them on a foggy morning, and you'll understand what I mean. The light filters down in golden shafts, and everything is hushed and sacred. Your voice automatically drops to a whisper. The Yurok people, who've lived here longer than anyone can remember, have stories about these groves. They say the oldest trees have guardian spirits that protect them from harm. Old Tom Matz, one of the tribal elders, told me once that his great-grandfather made a pact with these guardians long ago. Respect the ancient ones, he said, and they'll let you pass. Harm them, and you'll feed their roots. I always figured it was just folklore. Beautiful stories to explain the feeling you get when you're alone among giants that were old when Rome was young. The real threats to these trees were chainsaws and bulldozers, not angry spirits. I was wrong about that. The grove I patrol most often sits about 3 miles back from the main park road, accessible only by a narrow trail that winds through smaller redwoods and dense fern undergrowth. No vehicles can get back there, which is both a blessing and a curse that keeps the casual vandals away. But it also means when trouble comes, you're on your own. The ancient grove itself is something else entirely. 27 trees, each over 1,500 years old, standing in a rough circle around one massive grandfather tree that my best guess puts at over 2,000 years. The canopy is so thick that even at noon, it feels like twilight. The air smells of moss and deep earth, and it's so quiet you can hear your own heartbeat. I've walked those paths thousands of times, and I know every root, every fallen log, every bird call, which is why, on that October morning in 1971, I knew immediately that something was wrong. The forest was too quiet, not peaceful quiet, quiet, The kind of silence that makes your skin crawl and your hand drift toward the radio on your belt. I'd been hiking the morning patrol route when I noticed it. No bird calls, no squirrel chatter. Even the insects had gone silent. That's when I saw the fresh cuts in the trees. The cuts were clean and deep, made by a professional chainsaw. Someone had been marking the ancient trees for harvest. As I got closer to the sacred grove, my heart started pounding. Carving into these trees wasn't just illegal, it was like spray painting the Sistine Chapel. I radioed dispatch. Chuck here. I've got evidence of illegal logging activity in Section 12, requesting backup and law enforcement support. The radio crackled with static. Copy, Chuck. Sheriff's Department is about 40 minutes out. Can you assess the damage? I'm heading to the grove now. What I found there still gives me nightmares. 3 men from a logging crew lay scattered around the base of the grandfather tree. At first glance, it looked like an industrial accident. Their chainsaws were buried deep in the trunk, still idling, but the men weren't holding them anymore. They were arranged in a perfect triangle around the tree, each about 20 feet from the base, but they weren't dead. The first one I reached was maybe 30 years old, wearing a hard hat and logger's boots. His eyes were open, staring up at the canopy, and he was breathing. But when I knelt beside him, I saw why he wasn't moving. Tree roots, thin as fishing line but strong as steel cables, had grown up through the forest floor and wrapped around his arms, legs, and torso. They held him spread-eagled against the earth, and more roots were slowly threading through his clothes, his hair, even through the gaps between his fingers. Jesus Christ, I whispered. Can you hear me? His eyes moved to look at me, and his mouth opened and closed like he was trying to speak. But instead of words, what came out sounded like wind through leaves. The other 2 were in the same condition, alive, conscious, but being slowly absorbed by the forest floor. Their chainsaws kept running, but the trees showed no damage from the cuts. Instead, fresh bark was growing over the wounds, sealing them like they'd never been touched. I tried to pull the roots away from the first logger, but they were stronger than my hands. When I grabbed my knife to cut them, something strange happened. The blade bounced off the roots like they were made of steel. But more than that, touching them sent a shock up my arm that felt like I'd grabbed a live wire. Images flashed through my mind. Not my memories, but older ones. Much older. I saw the grove as it was 100 years ago, then 200, then 500. I watched Native American families gathering beneath the trees, their children playing among the ferns. I saw Spanish explorers passing through with wonder on their faces. I saw the first loggers arriving with their axes and saws, and I felt something massive and ancient stirring to life in response. What the hell? ... I stumbled backward, my hand still tingling from touching the roots. That's when I heard it. A sound like groaning wood, but deeper and more purposeful. It seemed to come from the trees themselves, starting low and building until it resonated in my chest. The loggers' chainsaws sputtered and died, but the sound kept growing. And then I saw movement in my peripheral vision. Something large was moving between the trees, just beyond the edge of my vision. Every time I turned to look directly at it, there was nothing there, but I could feel it watching me, measuring me, deciding what to do with me. My radio crackled. Chuck, what's your status? Sheriff's ETA is now 20 minutes. I reached for the handset, but when I tried to speak, no sound came out. The radio was working, could hear dispatch clearly, but somehow I couldn't make myself heard. It was like the forest itself was blocking my transmission. Chuck, please respond. We're sending additional units. The groaning sound grew louder, and now I could tell it was coming from the grandfather tree. The massive trunk was swaying slightly, though there was no wind. The 3 loggers' eyes had rolled back in their heads, and the roots binding them were pulsing like veins. I did the only smart thing I could think of. I ran. But as I crashed through the underbrush, heading back toward the main trail, I could hear something following me. Not footsteps exactly, but the sound of branches bending and leaves rustling in a pattern that matched my pace. Whatever was back there, it was big, and it was keeping up with me easily. When I finally reached my truck, I was gasping, and my shirt was soaked with sweat. I fumbled for my keys, hands shaking, and gunned the engine. But as I looked in my rearview mirror, I saw something that made my blood freeze. A figure stood at the edge of the tree line, maybe 100 yards back. It was tall, much taller than any person should be, and its outlines seemed to blend with the trees behind it. As I watched, It raised one arm, and I swear I could see branches and leaves where its fingers should have been. Then it turned and melted back into the forest. The sheriff's department found the 3 loggers exactly where I'd left them, but by the time the paramedics cut them free, they weren't speaking English anymore. They made sounds like wind through branches, like creaking wood, like rustling leaves. The doctors at Eureka General said it was some kind of shock-induced aphasia. They kept them for observation, but the men just lay in their beds, staring at the ceiling and making forest sounds. Within a week, all 3 had escaped. Security cameras showed them walking out of the hospital in the middle of the night, moving in perfect unison. They were found the next morning back in the grove, sitting cross-legged around the grandfather tree. They were calm and peaceful, but they wouldn't leave. They wouldn't even acknowledge that other people were speaking to them. Eventually, the state decided to leave them alone. They seemed healthy enough, and they weren't hurting anyone. Park visitors occasionally reported seeing the tree people, 3 men who sat so still among the redwoods that you could walk right past them without noticing, but I knew they weren't the same men who'd come to cut down the trees. My partner, Dave Lumberton, thought I was losing it. Dave was a good ranger, 28 years old, with a degree in forestry from UC Davis. He approached everything scientifically, with facts and data and rational explanations. "Chuck, you're talking about magic. Trees and tree spirits," he said as we hiked back to the grove a few days later. "These guys probably got into some bad drugs, or suffered carbon monoxide poisoning from their equipment. There's a logical explanation for everything." "Then explain." "This," I said, pointing to the grandfather tree. Where the chainsaws had cut into the bark, there was no damage at all. The cuts had healed completely, leaving bark so smooth and unmarked it looked like it had never been touched. But more than that, the tree had grown. In less than a week, it had added several inches to its circumference and at least 10 feet to its height. Dave pulled out a tape measure and his notebook. "Trees don't grow that fast. Chuck, you must be remembering wrong." But as he wrapped the tape around the trunk, something happened. His hands started shaking and his eyes went wide. I can feel it," he whispered. "Feel what?" "It's alive. I mean really alive. Not just growing thinking." Dave yanked his hands away from the tree and stepped back, but I could see the change in his expression. The same look I'd seen on the loggers' faces before the roots took them. "We need to go," I said. "Now," but Dave wasn't listening. He was staring up at the canopy with a look of wonder on his face. "Do you hear that, Chuck? It's singing." I grabbed his arm and pulled him away from the tree. "Dave, we're leaving, right now." As we walked back toward the trail, I kept looking. Over my shoulder, something was following us again, moving from tree to tree just outside my vision, and Dave kept trying to turn around and go back. "It needs protection, Chuck," he said. "Someone's always trying to hurt it. It's been alone for so long." "Dave, you're scaring me. Snap out of it." But over the next few days, Dave got worse. He started spending his Ofawars in the grove, sitting with the 3 former loggers. His skin began to look rough and bark-like, and when he spoke, his voice had a dry, woody quality. He talked constantly about the tree's needs, their pain, their ancient wisdom. Other park staff started to notice. Dave would show up to work with dirt under his fingernails and leaves in his hair. He stopped eating regular food and started chewing on twigs and drinking water straight from the creek. When anyone questioned him about it, he'd just smile and say the trees were teaching him to live properly. Then the second logging crew arrived. This one was bigger 8 men with industrial equipment. They had permits, or claimed to, for selective harvesting in the outer sections of the park. But I knew they were after the ancient grove. Word had gotten out about the size of those trees, and certain people will pay enormous amounts for old-growth redwood. I tried to warn them off. I told them about the first crew, about the strange accidents, about the men who'd never been quite right afterward. But they laughed at me. "Listen, old-timer," said their foreman, a big guy named Rick Santos. "We've been cutting timber for 20 years. We know how to handle a few big trees." They set up camp about a mile from the grove and started working their way toward it, taking smaller trees as they went. Each day, they got closer to the ancient ones, and each day, the forest got angrier. Animals started behaving strangely. Birds would fly directly into trees, stunning themselves. Deer would stand in the middle of trails, refusing to move even. When trucks came toward them, the creek water turned dark and bitter-tasting. At night, campers reported hearing voices in the woods, not human voices. but the sound of wind and wood and rustling leaves formed into something almost like speech. Some visitors left early, saying the forest felt wrong, and watched. Dave spent more and more time in the grove, and when he came back to the ranger station, he'd deliver messages. "They want the cutting to stop," he'd say in his new, creaky voice. "The Ancient Ones are patient, but their patience has limits. The Protector is waking up." "What Protector?" I asked. Dave smiled, and I could see that his teeth were becoming brown and rough, like bark. "The one who made the pact. The one who's been sleeping in the deep roots for longer than white men have been on this continent. But he's waking up now, Chuck, and he's not happy." That's when I knew we were in real trouble. The night before Santos and his crew planned to reach the grove, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing sounds from the forest, groaning and creaking like a ship in a storm. Around midnight, I got dressed and drove out to the grove with a flashlight and my service revolver. The 3 former loggers were still there, but now Dave was with them. All 4 sat in perfect silence around the grandfather tree, their eyes closed, their breathing synchronized. But as I approached, they all opened their eyes at exactly the same moment and looked at me. "Chuck," Dave said, though his voice sounded like it was coming from far away, "you need to choose." "Choose what?" "The Protector is coming. Tomorrow, when the chainsaws start, he'll wake up completely. And when he does, everyone who's ever hurt the Ancient Ones will have to answer for it." Dave's bark-like skin was spreading up his neck and across his face. "Soon, he'd be more tree than man. That includes you, Chuck. You cut down trees for 12 years. You killed things that had been alive for centuries. The Protector remembers." In the darkness beyond the grove, something massive was moving. I could hear branches breaking and the ground shaking with each step. My flashlight beam caught glimpses of something that stood at least 15 feet tall, covered in bark and moss, with arms like tree trunks and fingers like branches. The ancient Protector had awakened. When Santos and his crew fired up their chainsaws the next morning, the sound echoed through the forest like screams. I was already at the grove, trying to convince Dave to leave with me, but he and the other 3 just sat there, smiling peacefully as the buzzing got closer. "They're going to die, Dave," I said. "All of them. You have to help me stop this." "Why would I stop it?" Dave asked. His face was now completely covered in bark-like skin, and small twigs were growing from his scalp where hair used to be. "They came here to murder things that are older than civilization. They deserve whatever happens to them." The sound of chainsaws grew louder, and with it came another sound, the groaning, creaking response of the forest itself. Trees began to sway without any wind. The ground trembled. Then the screaming started. I ran toward the sound, crashing through underbrush and jumping over fallen logs. What I found when I reached Santos's crew was unlike anything I'd ever seen. The Protector stood in the middle of their worksite like an ancient god of the forest. 15 feet tall, its body was made of living wood, bark, and moss. Its arms were as thick as tree trunks, ending in hands with fingers like branches. Its face was a rough approximation of human features carved from bark, but its eyes were ancient and intelligent and absolutely furious. 3 of the loggers were already down. One had been lifted 20 feet into the air by vines that wrapped around his arms and legs. Another was buried up to his chest in earth that had somehow liquefied and then solidified around him. The third was backing away, his chainsaw still running but forgotten in his hands. As tree roots erupted from the ground and reached for his ankles, Santos stood his ground, revving his saw and shouting, "It's just some guy in a costume, just some environmental nutjob." He charged at the Protector with his chainsaw raised. The ancient being moved faster than something that size should have been able to move. One massive hand swatted Santos aside like he was a mosquito. The logger flew 30 feet and hit a tree trunk with a sound like breaking sticks. But Santos had managed to cut the Protector's arm with his chainsaw before being swatted away. Dark sap poured from the wound, and the creature's roar shook leaves from every tree in the grove. That's when I understood something important. The Protector could be hurt. The remaining loggers scattered, abandoning their equipment and running for their lives, but the Protector wasn't done. It turned its attention to me, the man who'd spent 12 years of his life cutting down ancient trees. "Chuck Griswold," it said, its voice like wind through 1,000 branches. "I know you. I remember every tree you killed." The creature took a step toward me, and where its foot touched the ground, flowers bloomed. But they weren't normal flowers. They were made of bone and flesh, the remains of everyone who'd ever harmed the forest. I was young, I said, backing away. I didn't understand what I was doing. Understanding is not required for judgment, the protector said. Only action. You took life. Now you must give life in return. Roots began to emerge from the ground around my feet, reaching for my ankles. I drew my service revolver and fired 6 shots into the creature's chest. The bullets disappeared into its bark-like skin without effect. Iron cannot harm what grew before iron was ever forged, the protector said. But then I remembered something Dave had said the night before. The protector had made a pact with the Uruk people long ago, a pact based on respect and protection. Wait, I said, as the roots wrapped around my boots. I stopped cutting trees. I became a ranger. For 17 years, I've protected this forest. The protector paused. Words are wind. Show me. I looked around desperately and saw abandoned chainsaw, still running where he'd dropped it. Without thinking, I lunged for it, tearing free from the roots that held me. But instead of turning the saw on the protector, I carried it to the pile of logging equipment the crew had left behind. One by one, I destroyed their chainsaws, their marking paint, their ropes and hooks and cutting tools. The gas tanks exploded in balls of flame, and the metal components scattered like shrapnel. This forest is under my protection, I shouted over the noise of destruction. I swear by every tree I ever cut down that I'll never let anyone harm these groves again. The protector watched me destroy the logging equipment, its ancient eyes unreadable. When I finished, covered in sweat and gasoline and smoking metal fragments, it took another step toward me. Swear it on your life, the creature said. I swear it on my life. Swear it on your death. I swear it on my death. Then you may live. Chuck Griswold. But no, this eye will be watching. Harm these trees again, or allow others to harm them, and you will join your friend beneath the roots. The protector turned and walked back toward the ancient grove, each footstep causing flowers to bloom from the forest floor. As it reached the tree line, its form seemed to blur and shift, becoming less solid, more like a trick of light and shadow among the trunks. Within moments, it had disappeared completely, but I could still feel it watching. The official report blamed the logging crew's injuries on equipment malfunction and environmental hazards. Santos died from his injuries, but the other 3 survived, though they were never quite right afterward. Like the first crew, they started making sounds like wind and leaves instead of speaking English. The logging company pulled out of the area entirely after that. Word spread through the industry about the bad luck that followed anyone who tried to work the deep groves. Insurance companies started refusing to cover operations in certain sections of the park. Dave never came back from the forest. I'd visit the grove sometimes and see him sitting with the other tree-touched men, but he wouldn't acknowledge me anymore. His transformation was nearly complete. Bark covered his entire body, and small branches grew from his arms and head. In another few months, I don't think anyone would be able to tell he'd ever been human, but the forest was safe. I threw myself into conservation work with the passion of a man who'd seen what happens when you break faith with nature. I lobbied for expanded protected status for the ancient groves. I led educational tours to teach people about the importance of old-growth forests. I made sure every logging permit was scrutinized and every cutting operation was monitored. And late at night, when I walked the trails alone, I could feel the protector watching me, testing me, making sure I kept my word. Other rangers started noticing things. Trees growing faster than they should in areas that had been damaged by human activity. The legal campers found themselves hopelessly lost until they gave up and headed for the parking lot. Vandals who tried to carve initials in bark found their knives breaking or their hands cramping so badly they couldn't continue. The forest was fighting back, and the protector was its weapon. I'm 56 now, and I've kept my promise for 15 years. The ancient groves are safer than they've ever been, protected by law and by something much older than law. But I know my time is running out. Age and hard living are catching up with me, and soon I'll have to retire. The question is, who's going to take my place? The protector doesn't trust Italy. It remembers every chainsaw, every bulldozer, every human who's ever looked at a 2,000-year-old tree and seen only board feet of lumber. Whoever comes after me will have to prove themselves worthy of the pact I made that day among the smoking ruins of the logging equipment, because the protector is still out there, still watching, still waiting. And if you ever find yourself walking among the ancient redwoods of Northern California, remember this: those trees have stood for longer than your civilization has existed. They've survived ice ages and droughts and fires and floods. They've earned the right to live in peace. Respect them, and you'll be welcome in their cathedral halls. Harm them, and you'll discover that some things are older and stronger and far less forgiving than human law. The old trees have guardians. Don't give them a reason to wake up.